And the second question I have is, what place should Kubernetes have in your strategic IT roadmap for the next, say, 3 years? And what impediments might slow down their adoption? So we'll start with Andrew on this one.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. I think, like any evolution, it's important to probably go back to the business requirements of why you would deploy something like Kubernetes. Again, Kubernetes is an orchestrator. It is not necessarily a thing that runs your containers. There's various runtimes for that, as Ray's mentioned, Docker or Containerd and others that are emerging. And so to draw a comparison, you would be looking at, you'd look at something like the VMware vCenter would be kind of your equivalent of Kubernetes. And then you have your hypervisors, actually things that are running the workloads. And so where this might fit into your strategy, as more and more applications are being deployed or coming from the application developers in a microservice or containerized way, certainly Kubernetes is important to be able to orchestrate that and run those workloads in that containerized and Dockerized fashion. Whereas previously you might have run an entire VM, you'll now look to sort of run just the individual microservices. But I think also where there's value being added by considering a containerized approach orchestrated by Kubernetes is the portability between clouds. So the ability to run Kubernetes anywhere. And so that gives you that level of agility. It also creates capability for competitive tension between cloud vendors, for example, so that you don't necessarily have to railroad your application or your services into a particular cloud. You can actually take advantage of all the clouds. And then the next evolution that will come after that we're hearing about is edge computing. Well, again, Kubernetes can run workloads out towards the edge. So I think by having Kubernetes as part of your portfolio and transitioning the service and application deployment towards a containerized model that's orchestrated by Kubernetes, it really provides a huge amount of flexibility as you progress into a more cloud first type world. There is some additional enhancements that come off the back of Kubernetes that almost be kind of day three, future looking statements that I think Ray's going to touch on around serverless and how that relates, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on in the session, I believe.
All right, brilliant. Ray.
So the place that Kubernetes might, the role that Kubernetes might play, I imagine, in your strategic roadmap for the next half of the decade really depends on the position that you're at right now and the velocity with which you're migrating away in your product life cycles or according to your customer demands. If you're already fairly down that path towards consistent environments for your developers and for, or potentially, as Andrew said, you're doing a multi-cloud ecosystem, then you already understand some of the pitfalls and some of the benefits involved. And I guess the big question as to how pivotal Kubernetes might be in the coming years is going to be, what are the tools that you have right now that solutions exist in the Helm package management ecosystem, for example. Helm being the Kubernetes native package management service, which is now adopting, I think, version 3 stable, and has an enormous marketplace of ready to deploy. In 5 minutes, you can run a Helm deploy command, and you've got your MySQL server, you've got your Elasticsearch cluster, auto scaling, and configured according to best practices. So if these are the sorts of applications that you already have in your stack, then you'll be able to deploy secure and scalable solutions for that in pretty much no time. And then, I don't know what the impediments towards that are, other than, I guess, familiarity and priorities. I don't know much more to add on that question.
Fair enough, too. Okay, Matt, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Problems. The guys have covered off, I think, a bunch of good topics. Problems. I think when containers were first, came to bear, and they were spun out of, Kubernetes was spun out of Google. they were stateless, right? And very much that meant that, from a container's perspective, a container might be waiting for a file to arrive. When a file arrives, container is spun up, it does something with the file, container disappears. And so containers were often used in that kind of lightweight, stateless manner. But as we've increasingly used containers for more important business critical applications, we've hit a challenge with stateful applications, which mean that the data that is created by the application within that container needs to live on beyond the life of the container. And containers didn't really think about that when they first started. And so you have quite a lot of complexity around, how do I allocate a volume of data, attach it to a container? How do I make it the right size, the right attributes in the right place? And dynamically doing that is a real challenge. And when you start to get at scale with the applications, it becomes a major problem. So, from a NetApp perspective, we've been focusing very much on solving that problem. We're a data management company. So we've brought a whole bunch of open source solutions to market so that it doesn't matter which cloud you're running your Kubernetes in, we can solve some of those problems for you. Because I think 6 out of 10 applications, the Helm charts that Ray was talking about, you download and run MongoDB in a container. Suddenly, well, what happens to that data when that container goes? And how do I replicate that to another container in another cloud? And how do I make sure that data is consistent? Because now it's a database and it's got all my customer information in it. So solving those problems is super important. So they're a challenge, and make sure you've got an answer to that as you start to adopt a container architecture.